NSW. Crime scene cleanup crew members of Reddit. What is your most disturbing story? I don't clean them for a living but had to clean a few apartments when my uncle managed an apartment complex. We had one tenant OD on H. He sat there for roughly 3 weeks before anyone noticed the smell. They took his body and left it to us to clean up. The dude vomited on the ceiling. There were little dry droplets of vomit all over the ceiling right above where he died, and to top it off he basically liquefied and left a puddle of gut juices on the concrete foundation underneath the carpet. I thought that crap was left to a professional team, but I guess it's optional, and if you don't want to pay for it, you can scoop the brains and blood up yourself. Or you could have just quit your job on the spot like holy shit. Not a personal story, but I watched a documentary a few years ago that was basically all about the traumatic events emergency responders had experienced. There are two that still stand out to me. The first was from a couple that was joyriding in their convertible on a windy road and somehow ended up flipping their car, which skidded down the road. Their heads were pretty much shaved off. One of the responders described the blood trail as if someone had used one of those crappy pencil erasers that leave tons of residue and dragged it across the road. The other one was from responders that were on the scene after Mount St. Helens erupted. Many people were unable to escape and ended up being covered in hot ash. When it came time to collect their bodies, they had pretty much been turned into cooked meat mush that had to be shoveled out bit by bit. Also, when they were getting ready to leave, one of the responders saw his crew member whistling while doing a slow, comical walk towards their helicopter. The guy was swinging something around one of his fingers like a pocket watch, but as he got closer he realized he was twirling someone's eyeball around his finger by the optic nerve. Not a CS tech, but I took a class to qualify for entry-level jobs in that field. Our teacher was a detective of a major metro city near us. He told us of a story where he went out to a crime scene where the body was up in the attic and had been there for a while. It was in its late stages of decomposition. Your body begins to bloat from all the gases, bile, and pus that are forming in your body. Your skin also becomes really thin and oily in the process too. It's not a pretty sight or pleasant smell. Not that I have experienced it myself. Pictures were shown in class, not of that specific case but of a similar stage. Anyway, coroner's guys dressed in coveralls and masks comes to pick up the body. They wrap it in plastic and get it on the stretcher, but have to get it down a narrow and steep attic entrance. Our teacher, the detective, is at the bottom supervising, and it was crime scene after all. One of the guys make it down the attic and you can tell they're struggling a bit to get the body through. Then the worst thing that could have happened. The body literally popped like a water balloon inside the body bag that it was in. These body bags aren't really sealed either, so it starts leaking. It leaks onto the poor coroner's assistant at the bottom of the stairs to the attic. The poor guy was covered in blood, bile, pus, and unimaginable fluids. Our teacher swears that he saw the guy literally vomit in his mask that he was wearing, and that it was filling up his mask with vomit. I don't know if it's a true story, but I know based on the pictures he showed us that day, detectives have seen some crap. TLDR. Coroner's assistant gets covered in dead body juices and pukes in his own mask. Obligatory not cleanup crew, but did some work on a council property after a person had been deceased and they're unknown for a month or so. Go in and there's a few guys working there already, all too willing to regale the story to me and show me where they had to basically cut him out of the floor. Upstairs flat, wooden floor. Reason they'd been decovered is because they started leaking into the property below. But the most striking bit was that the floor in rooms that hadn't yet been addressed was literally carpeted with dead flies a couple of thick, and being that my area of work was in one of those rooms, got to enjoy the experience of walking over them. Crunchy. Nothing to do with the cleanup, thank God. But 30 odd years ago I worked in the finance department in a hospital in England. An ambulance team turned up with a carrier bag. Now it wasn't unusual if someone had died en route to hospital for them to bring us the possessions of the deceased and we'd look after them until next of kin was notified. All of it would just go into the safe, no problem. However, they were wearing gloves and holding it at arm's length. When I asked WTF was in the bag, turned out a guy had killed himself over August bank holiday weekend in his car. He ended up in there for 5 days. No one noticed him, and in the heat he'd melted into the seat. However, for some weird reason he'd put about £5,000 in cash under the seat. I guess for his family. And of course his melting body had contaminated it. We got the mortuary team to come and biohazard bag it, but you could still smell it. We had a really old safe that was hardly ever used, so shoved it in there. Phoned the Bank of England and explained. They said send it to them. They'd destroy it and issue new notes to the next of kin. So that's what we did. So pleased his poor family got the money in the end. My neighbor was a bright college professor, but he was also bipolar. He bought a new car one Friday afternoon and told his wife he was going to see a friend in SC. He never got to the friend's house. 2 weeks later he was found in a secluded area. He had blown his brains out in the car. This was the height of a SC summer. The state was billing her to keep the car in storage and she had no one to go get it. So I and another neighbor drove 3 hours to pick the car up. I cannot describe the foulness of the smell, but the car was covered in blood and small body parts. We used Vicks under our noses and got car back to her hometown. I don't think she ever saw the car once, which was good. I'm not a cleanup crew person, but I do have a pretty grim story. My father, his friend, his son, his friend's son, not my brother, went to a bar a couple years ago. They were there until around midnight before they decided to go home. All three of them were extremely drunk. So my father's friend's son, call him John, went back to his cottage. John was only like 19. So he gets in and goes in the living room and turns on his electric fireplace. Instead of going to bed, he just lays on the rug in front of the fireplace. Once again he was very drunk. So he must have blacked out facing up, and at some point during the night, because he vomited and didn't wake up, the vomit blocked his airways and he suffocated. He wasn't found until 3 days later by his father, my father's friend. The only description I was ever told was that it didn't look real. I try not to think about what it looked like. But yes, it's not exactly a cleanup story. It's more of a heartbreak. I couldn't imagine being a father and walking into my own son's body after 19 years of caring for him. To see him like that. Guys, I know it gets said a lot, but please drink responsibly. Not just for yourself, but for the people who love you. My dad was a forensic collision investigator. CSI for fatal or near fatal car crashes essentially. One crash he attended was a motorcyclist speeding over a hill, hit the side of a lorry that was pulling out, went straight under the trailer. Dad found the helmet on the side of the road a few meters down, the rider's decapitated head still inside. The one that really messed with him was a car that had flipped onto a live rail line and set on fire. He was actually one of the first there, and when they got there they couldn't access the car because of the heat and the rail line still being live. They realized though that the kids inside were still alive at that point. Tried all they could but couldn't get near. Never saw him get too bothered by his work, but that one got to him. Think the kids were a similar age to me and my sister. My stepdad is a sheriff. Last week, he was called to a welfare check on an old lady from a concerned neighbor. She had home deliveries dated 2 weeks prior, completely soaked from the rain. The officers went inside. The house reeked. She was a hoarder. Trash was piled 5 feet high. She was in her recliner so full of gas, she was about to blow up any day. Obviously that's the smell, right? Number. She had a chihuahua. The chihuahua of sorts. She had 15 puppies, all of which were emaciated, flea, disease, and trash ridden. The dogs were the worst smell, despite their owner being 2 weeks postpartum and filled with gas. Animal rescue was called, and my stepdad spent his entire day there. He came calm and washed his hands with baking soda and vinegar, anything to get the smell out. Skimming. I saw home delivery and postpartum and thought this was going to be much worse. You mean post-mortem? I worked for special cleaning services. I was asked to clean suicide scene. We later found out he overdosed on pills. Since they were still at the apartment, the body was already removed from the apartment already and taken to mortician. Nothing special, right? It was summer and dude wasn't paying his electricity bills. The body was found only after a week of decaying. I guess the neighbors noticed the smell. The most disturbing part apart the smell was his body juices soaked in the carpet and the floor. So you could actually see where he was laying and decomposing. We also found a lot of self-help books, Bibles, Alcoholics Anonymous brochures. Dude was in the dark place. As an officer, I went to a hoarder's house who hadn't been seen in days. After seeing flies in the window and smelling a stench, I knew I had to make entry to a dead body. Little did I know, I'd be spending the next several hours in a hothouse offloading piles of newspapers and debris he collected to board himself in. And I mean literally. From the floor to the ceiling there was a maze of a small walkway where the body was found. He made a seat of newspapers where he sat, had opened cans of beans he ate the last few days of his life, a radio that was blasting, and a small walkway to the bathroom. He must have moved an entire wall of debris to entirely close himself in. I was drenched and wet. It was a hot summer day, and I had to wear a gas mask because the smell would nearly make you pass out. The body was the liquid remains of a very large man. Oh, and there was the cat. After offloading nearly a half ton of debris to get to the body for the coroner, I had to put it all back and lock it up for biohazard purposes. I'm sure it probably had to get demolished. I went home after that. I was probably there most of the entire shift with no lunch break. Not that I'd use one. My father worked in biohazard cleaning for 15 years, so I actually have heard some crazy stories. One of the most memorable stories was in late summer in the southeast US. Temperatures over 90°F every day and crazy high humidity. A homeless man had found a nice sleeping spot in the back of an unlocked tractor trailer. It happened to be full of lots of packing scraps, broken down and ripped up cardboard boxes. A nice dry comfy place to sleep. Well, this man expired and was not discovered for months. He had closed the door behind him so most of the stench and bugs went unnoticed. When bodies are well protected from the elements, but in high temperatures like a closed metal box in the sweltering southern heat, they will begin to swell and inflate. This man popped and then was essentially liquefied. The human soup was then absorbed by all the cardboard. I feel bad for the poor soul that first opened the door to that trailer. I can only imagine the stench that smacked him in the face. The stories are endless, but the regular murder, suicide, and vehicle deaths become a standard day. It's really the crazy circumstance and locations that make for the wild memories. Another quick bonus was a person that committed suicide on the balcony of a high-rise apartment. Rained down blood on the 15 or so balconies and windows below. That's days worth of work in a cherry picker, scrubbing every drop of blood off of the side of a building. Obligatory, this wasn't me. Trigger warning, cruelty to animals. Worst I've ever heard of was the cleanup from an Airbnb that was misused. Apparently it looked like an ordinary orgy at first. God awful smells, disgusting stains, etc. The sort of thing that ruins your week but doesn't leave permanent scars. Exclamation point until the cleaners realized there was a smell that couldn't be explained as fricking smells. The smell of rotting animals. The sick fricks had stuck 2 mattresses together after putting a cat between them. Then they had the orgy on top of this bed, with everyone involved contributing to crushing the cat to death. My username is the business name, and yes, you can Google or URL for the website. The call came in around 3 PM just as my co-worker and I sat down to finally eat our lunch. We had just finished up a GI bleed that thankfully wasn't fatal. The guy on the phone was distant and cold, almost robotic. He asked the normal questions and we decided that we needed to dispatch immediately. Today wouldn't be a lunch day. The house was a standard suburban home in an upscale neighborhood and we met our client as he sat on the driveway by the road. He informed us the incident took place in the back bedroom and hallway. To let ourselves in and get done what is needed, and he would handle whatever would be needed at that point once his was cleaned. With our camera in hand, we walked in. The house was immaculate with family pictures hung up on the walls and baseball trophies displayed around the faux fireplace. The first thing that caught my eye was the leash hanging by the door. The second was the food and water bowls by the fridge. It then hit me that I didn't see nor hear a dog. We made our way to the incident, and before you could even make entry into the hallway, the sight of blood splatter encased the entryway. His teenage son had got into an argument with his stepmother and out of pure rage had grabbed his dad's shotgun with birdshot. He put one in her chest right there in the hallway. He then turned around, made his way to the bedroom and put another in his best friend, a German Shepherd, before he turned the gun on himself. I see death. A lot of death, and I see blood. A lot of blood. But seeing that outline of the dog still brings me to tears. Not eligible to reply as I am not in that profession, but I'd just like to vote for those super obese people who get fused to their couches. I saw a whole documentary on it. The moisture and heat literally causes their flesh and the molecules of the couch to intermingle to the point where the couch is a part of this person's body, and ripping them away will kill them. Kind of like a turtle shell. Super horrific, but fascinating. Not me, but a friend that thought he wanted to be an EMT. He was 17 back in the late 1980s and he went on a ride along in an ambulance. They got called to a trailer park in response to a welfare check of an older woman. They found the woman and an unknown man passed away in the bedroom in the missionary position fused together. It had been some time that they expired. Apparently the man who was larger than the woman died while fricking and she couldn't get him off of her and she suffocated. Well, it was their job to transport the bodies to the coroner's office and had to get them into body bags. But they didn't have one large enough to transport both in the same bag, so they asked the cop who was outside to come and help separate the two, but he said no, not my responsibility or something like that. So he as a 17-year-old kid and the one other EMT had to separate the two corpses, put them in the body bags and took them where they needed. He is now a designer, CAD, fabricator in a welding shop. Same leaking story. A friend of mine about 6 years ago took some painkillers and downed a couple of beers. 2 weeks later, downstairs neighbor complained about the smell and the juices coming into her flat. PD came and found the bloated body. South Florida June heat did its job. Not me, but a few years ago at my college, one of my friends that lived on campus was walking to the library around 6 AM to work on some stuff for finals. As they were coming up the following week, he heard a really loud sound, as if someone had dropped something really heavy. About a block later, he came across a student that had jumped off of the 6-story parking garage directly onto a concrete walkway below. He called the police, of course, but unfortunately there were quite a few other students that had to walk by and witness this scene before police and paramedics could arrive. Maybe disturbing in another sense of the word, but my uncle's a paramedic at a fire department. I've heard this story almost every year around Christmas. It never gets old. So the fire department gets a call to a house for an unresponsive man and my uncle's on call. They get there in time to find about a 400-pound guy laying in bed naked. They check him out and pronounce him dead on the spot. They're now however in a bit of a predicament as this guy is 400 pounds and they have to move him out of there. So my uncle along with about 7 other guys they had to call get enlisted to help carry this guy out. Now, this is where things get a little complicated. They managed to get him on a stretcher, but due to the fact this guy was in an upstairs bedroom they couldn't just roll him out of there. Some sort of complications with the hallways too. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, they had to carry him down the stairs. As they're on their way down the stairs, my uncle is positioned right at this dead guy's midpoint. Schlack. Mr. Dead guy's big ol' sklong pops out from under the sheet they had over him and smacks my uncle right in the face. This dude was dead and still had a hard on. My uncle just so happened to get caught in the strike zone. Anyway, they all start laughing, respectably, as the wife of the man was still present. Anyway, it's still one of the funniest stories I've heard from my uncle to this day. When I was in 6th grade, there was an accident right in front of my school. The roads were right next to our school's fence. A car had collided with a truck carrying metal rebbers. The rods went through the car's windshield and through the driver's head. There was a pool of reddish and sloppy mess under the car. My mom picked me up from the school later and upon hearing the story, decided to cheer me up with an ice cream. She got me strawberry sundae. Thanks, Mom. I don't work for cleanup, but I do work in crime scene investigation. My worst was a drunk driving incident. Male was driving his sports car while intoxicated at a very high velocity in an urban area at around 4 AM. He seemed to have lost control of his vehicle and drove into a thick concrete power pole. The vehicle got stuck about halfway through the concrete. Now the entire engine was lodged into the electrical system of the power pole, which started to ignite the vehicle. The male was trapped inside the vehicle, hopefully died on impact, and pinned in by the steering wheel. The whole car caught ablaze. It took firefighters longer to douse the flames out due to it being an electrical fire. Luckily they did. Unluckily, while we were conducting the crime scene investigation, the car caught fire again. Firefighters had to be called out again. The vehicle then had to be transported to the medical examiner's office, which on the way to the medical examiner's office it once again caught fire on top of the flatbed tow truck in 8 AM traffic. Firefighters responded once again to put out the fire for good this time. Once we got to the medical examiners, the whole vehicle had to be clawed open just so we can get the body out. The body was burnt whole, which caused the skin and bones to fuse with the car seat car parts. The medical examiners had to saw off the buttocks and leave it on the car seat, for it was far too infused with the metal of the car. I have literally seen a man's butt be ripped off. So please do not drink and drive. I had an auto repair shop between two tow companies who both had contracts for evidence holds. Whenever the car, truck, motorcycle was involved in a fatality, they would hold them. This is in the San Francisco Bay Area, so they got them on a pretty regular basis. One time a brand new Camaro SS comes in, 5-6 years ago, and the driver's side window was shot out. Someone walked up to the car and shoots the driver and passenger. Both died. The car was only bought a week before. Normally a dealer can pick up a car and impound even if the driver lost it for 30 days. But in this case the police wouldn't give them the release, cause it's in the tow yard as evidence for 8 months. The tow company is charging the city the cars come out of $75 a day storage. They finally tell the tow guy it's good to go. He files a lien and sometimes the finance companies miss them. They did in this case, and the tow company takes ownership. They put in new seats, replace the door panel the 3 bullets messed up, replace the window, and detail the heck out of the car. They sold it and made a killing between the new Camaro SS and the storage fees. Inside the car was gruesome though. Blood and bits everywhere. A guy had an attic space in the ceiling of his bathroom. He was doing something up there and somehow got trapped in a position where his legs were stuck and the top half of his body was hanging out of the hole. He was stuck there long enough that he died, dangling like that. I'm not sure how long he was there, but it was long enough that all the stuff in his body, blood, guts, etc. had all dropped and pulled down into his head chest, forming a giant sack of human gloop. Police were called for a welfare check, and they couldn't enter the bathroom because the guy's body was blocking the door from opening. So instead of removing the door, they decided to use some kind of ram to smash the door open. So they smash the door, and whilst doing so they also smash the guy, who explodes all over the place. I'm not a cleanup guy, by the way. Thank God. I was a firefighter and heard this story secondhand from a colleague. My mom rents out a guest house on her property. Just last week her renter accidentally overdosed on C, it seems, but the coroner hasn't confirmed yet. He probably died Saturday night and was found on Wednesday. The AC was on, but we live in Florida. His cat was sitting on the bed with him the whole time. No, the cat did not eat him, but he was traumatized. I asked the police if we could take him for now and they gave him to us, and I gave him a bath. Then they removed the body. My mom and I went into the guest house to take the mattress out to the garbage. But when I entered the room, I had to tell my mom to go back to her house and not to look at the room. There was blood soaked through the mattress pad, and the police had left blood and other fluid soaked sheets and blankets in 2 of the corners, as well as their gloves. I am sure this is not the worst scene ever, but the worst, and only, death scene I've ever had to clean up. As a side note, I got pulled over for speeding on the way to my mom's house and told the cop that pulled me over there is a dead body sitting in my mom's house. His response was, I'm just here because you were speeding. I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but maybe he should have questioned me about the body situation a little more. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.